So welcome back. Let's we're currently flying over the Pegasus bridges, Horsa and Pegasus, which you can see below us there, and we are currently talking at around about we got to about 1 o'clock now in the morning. And let's discuss the response of the Germans. So we left part 9. We're now into part 10, and we are Brigadier Nigel Poet has just arrived. 7th Battalion, Parachute Battalion, has parachuted into the drop zone that you can see below us. And it's at this time that there is the noise of engines coming from the south into Benouville. Before we talk about that, though, at the same time, we have reports that there's a car and a motorbike approaches the bridge, the Horsa bridge, down this road. So this is Ranville, and basically the commander of the bridge, Major Hans Schmidt. He's the commander of the 736th Grenadier Regiment, and they're the ones tasked with the defense of the bridge. So he's been this evening taking some French lessons in the village of Ranville, and when he hears the drop zone going on, he races back. So he knows at this point that he's in trouble. He's not at his post. He hasn't got the explosives on the bridge, so that he knows that the bridges can't be blown. He didn't trust his men. He thought that, well, if it's going to be a parachute drop, I should have time to get back to the bridges and blow them up. So he realizes he's got to get back quickly. As I say, he was taking some French lessons from a very nice French girl, and she joins him in the car, and he drives down the road here towards Horsa Bridge. She gets scared, and he lets her out of the car, and then the car and the motorcycle speed down the road towards the Horsa Bridge. And so he, when he drives through, they get shot up, and he gets so Sweeney engages, the driver's killed, and the third and Major Hans Schmidt is shot in the legs. He is taken to Howard CP here, and by this time, and he gets treated by Captain Vaughan, who's the surgeon. Vaughan's was the guy who was in Glider 3, and he gets knocked out, and he's actually been knocked out for 30 minutes, so he's now woken. He's a bit disorientated, but he starts treating the major, the German Major Hans Schmidt, and of course Hans Schmidt is ranting and saying how the Allies aren't going to win, and you know, and shoot me because I've failed my duty, and Captain Vaughan basically stabs him with morphine, and he turns a little bit happier after that. So as I say, at this time as well, we got the sound of engines coming from Benouville. At this point, the section of Howard's men have dug in along the west bank, south of the Caen Canal. So they're kind of in this area here, and they can hear armoured vehicles approaching. Wally Parr, he runs back across the bridge and into the gliders to try to pick up a PIAT anti-tank weapon. When he went, when he got back, he tried to load it, and he found that it had been dented and damaged in the crash and was unusable. There was one PIAT that was working, and it was in Fox's platoon. The armoured vehicle, Fox's platoon was guarding this T-junction. I was probably the direction of the armoured vehicle was from this road here. People talk about what it was, but whether it was an actual Mark IV tank or whatever. But it was probably almost certainly a half track with a 37mm gun on it, and that's I think that was according to Saul David in his book Sky Warriors. The PIAT is in the hands of Sergeant Charles Wagger Thornton, and they describe that he is lying beside the road across from the cafe garden. So lying across the road, or beside the road across from the cafe garden. So if this is the cafe, well, are we talking here? Probably, maybe. So we've got an armoured vehicle then coming down this road from the left and turning into this road. So Wagger Thornton, he's also the guy who used the mortar on the machine gun on the Horsa bridge. So he's got these PIAT things have to be. He's got one shot. The range on a PIAT is you've got to be pretty close, 50 yards max. Unlikely to get a chance to reload without a response. The armoured vehicle was being followed by infantry behind, and there's a second vehicle behind that. So he needed to make sure he hit. It's reported he waited until the vehicle was about 30 yards away, and then he fires, and he hits this armoured vehicle, which is probably a half-track. And this thing explodes. Howard reports that it's likely that the half-track was carrying ammunition. So this thing starts cooking and blowing up. The commander of the 1st Company Panzer Jaeger Battalion, 716. This is where the armoured vehicle belongs to. He's killed, and then his subordinates immediately back out. Von Luck, the German commander of 21st Panzer, he believes this is one of the most important events on D-Day, because the Germans come back up this road. The other vehicle reverses. They return probably up this road, and they are reporting back. Probably misreporting the strength that's at the bridge. They believe they've also got an anti-tank gun, a 6-pounder. So they've obviously they put the willies up, the Germans, and the Germans are going to wait for reinforcements. So this is buying the 7th Parachute Battalion now time. Round about this time, Howard hears from Dr. Vaughan that Den Brotheridge has died. This is Den Brotheridge. So he becomes the first casualty of D-Day from enemy action on the ground. It's quite a sad story because his wife was pregnant at the time. So Howard knows that it was only it won't take long for the Germans to reorganize. So he needs Pine-Coffin's men here as soon as possible. Pine-Coffin says that the drop was difficult. There's quite a lot of dispersion because the moon was covered at the time of the drop. He actually also injures his ankle. He starts to gather. So 7th Battalion is landing here. There is a rendezvous point that he's created, or they had planned. I'm not sure where that was. But so he's begins collecting stragglers. And he is finding it hard to orientate himself, but then a flare is dropped from an aircraft, and he says that the church spire at Ranville can be seen. He and he's reporting that this is around about 1:45 that he starts getting significant numbers at his rendezvous point. He decides at this point he's going to leave and head for the bridge, and he leaves Major Steel Bomb, B-A-U-M-E, at the rendezvous point to round up stragglers. C Company was of the 7th Battalion Parachute Regiment. He's is commanded by Major Bartlett, and he's sent ahead at speed to link up with Howard at the bridge. Bartlett is dropped about 3 miles away, and it turns out that Major Nigel Taylor, then in A Company, then pushes on. And these, so they're pushing in to the bridges. They're sending 2 companies as quick as possible. These companies, by the way, are also, and they're carrying dinghies. In fact, Richard Todd, who dropped on the far drop zone and had a dinghy strapped to his leg, because they were fully expecting these bridges to be blown. The gliders that landed also had dinghies in them, so they were very glad to be able to ditch those. So Howard records that he meets up with Major Taylor at 2:50. And that Lieutenant Colonel Pine-Coffin arrives 10 minutes later at 3 o'clock in the morning. So at this point, Lieutenant Colonel Pine-Coffin takes control and relieves Howard of command of his of the bridge's defense. He Pine-Coffin orders Howard's men to be brought back over the canal bridge and act as a reserve with responsibility for the river bridge and the area between crossings. So he sends then A Company of the 7th Parachute Battalion in across the bridge to the south side towards Benouville, and he sends B Company, which is he says B Company of the 7th Parachute. He sends them to the Le Port, which is to the north of the bridge in this direction here. He tells Bartlett when he arrives that he's going to be in support and reserve on the west end of the canal bridge. So C Company will hold the bridge. And we have A and B moving out to each of the villages. Lieutenant Richard Todd, I think he gets mentioned a lot because he's the assistant adjutant to the 7th Battalion, and he will play John Howard in the film The Longest Day in 1962, and he also plays Guy Gibson in the Dam Busters in 1955. He jumped into this drop zone over here, and he's ordered to set up a HQ, a battalion HQ, below the hamlet of Le Port. So it's between the cafe and the church, so it's in this area, I believe here. This is the church at Le Port. So that is the initial German response. So we mentioned Major Hans von Luck. He's the commander of the Panzer Grenadier Regiment of 125 of the 21st Panzer Division, and he is based in the village of Bellingreville, which is 12 miles to the south. See if I can find that. So we're let's see if I can find it. It's on. So this is Caen. And so I think it's this village here. So he's down in this. Actually, it might be this one further down. Yeah, it's one of these villages here. It's difficult to see. I think it's this one here. So this is where von Luck is based, and you can see how far it is there from the coast. So he hears at 12 p.m. he hears the aircraft, and he's experienced to know as well that he can hear aircraft that are flying low, below 800 feet, and so he's aware that this means that there's either a supply drop to the resistance, or there is going to be parachute drops. So he can hear these planes coming in over, and so he receives a call at 12 o'clock as well from his adjutant to say that troopers and gliders had been spotted in their section, and so he immediately orders the bulk of his regiment to be put on alert and informed the divisional headquarters at Saint-Pierre-sur-Dive, which is 8 miles further southeast of Bénouville. He orders his 2nd Battalion stationed to the north and nearest the coast to go into action where necessary and bring any prisoners to him. He's informed that the 5th Company of the 2nd Battalion had already counterattacked towards Cairon, which is this village. I believe it's this one. This one here. And he's also told that a British medical officer has already been captured. Luck's adjutant at this time was Lieutenant Liebskind. He phones Divisional HQ, but he's informed that General Major Fuchstinger and his staff were in Paris. So, he leaves the message saying he's requesting clearance to launch a concentrated night attack as soon as the divisional commander returns. By this time, Luck has got some captured parachutists, and he knows from them that the target of the landings were the bridges at Benouville and Ranville. So he knows that this is the time when parachute drops happen, that you need to respond now. His report was being passed up the chain of command, but no order could come, and he couldn't move his tanks because they're basically at Corps and Army level, Group B. There was no joined up thinking about what whether this was the actual target of the invasion, and if it might have been just a diversionary act. Rommel, we've discussed this before, but Rommel had gone off to Berlin, took advantage of the bad weather to take his wife a 50th birthday present, so he wasn't back. So the 21st Panzer Division had 2 Panzer Grenadier regiments, and one of them on each side of the Orme, with the 192nd Regiment, Grenadier Regiment, on the west side, and von Lux on the 125 Regiment on the east. And the main tank section was further to the south. The people talk about, they didn't get the orders to move, but von Lux had got an order, a general order from Hitler. his division had got the order. They gave a general instruction that in an event of an airborne landing, all formations under attack were to immediately counterattack from their existing positions in order to destroy the enemy. But the problem was that this order got passed to division, but hadn't gone any lower. So major, the regimental layer, they hadn't received this instruction, so they were still waiting for orders to move. The German organization is super complicated, and when you're looking at who controls what and what parts of what battlefield, and none of them had a joined up thinking. Some, like Rommel, wanted to fight nearest to the beaches, some wanted to do it in layers, Hitler wouldn't commit stuff, there was confusion all over the place. General Oberst Dolman, who was the commander of the 7th Army, he was also away. He had been to he's gone to Rennes. Fortinger's gone to Rennes as well, chief of staff. So his Fortinger, his chief of staff, was in Paris to attend personal affairs, and the Dolman was in Rennes for a map exercise. So there was a complete failure of senior command in the German military about who was where. There was no talking between corps and armies about who was supposed to be where. And just because the weather was bad on the 5th, they all decided to go off and put their head in the sand. So complete failure of leadership. And this is what Major von Luck is obviously experiencing, because he knows what needs to happen, but he's frustrated because he's not getting the orders to move. He kind of does. He can do what he can. He moves his regiment into a defensive sort of front. He gets them all alert. He keeps on pressing the divisional headquarters, but nobody wants to take responsibility, and nobody will wake up Hitler. The Allied counter intelligence, had pushed the narrative of the Pas de Calais as the main landing. Discoveries of these dummy parachutists, these dolls basically, have been discovered south of Caron, and also to the east of the river Dives and to the southwest of Caen. And so they're getting information saying, oh, there's a parachute drop here, but then they're being told that it's a dummy. They don't really know what's going on. And in the nature itself of Allied parachute drops, it is confusion anyway. The misdropping of parachute troopers adds to the general confusion. So on the eastern side, then, so the Van Lux Panzer Grenadier 192 2nd Battalion, supported, reinforced by a battery of artillery and remnants of the 1st Company of the Panzerjäger Battalion of the 176. They're told to move out towards the bridges at Benouville and Ranville. So, the western side of the canal, and this is spearheaded by the 8th Company of the 2nd Battalion of the Panzergrenadier 192, and this is commanded by Oberleutnat Braatz, and their base was in Cairon. Let me just find where Cairon is. Okay, so let's as Cairon is to the north west of Caen. There we go. This is Cairon. It's quite a long way out, isn't it? They basically move towards the bridges from this direction. So Braatz's men get to the southern end of Benouville at about 4 a.m. and they're facing a depleted A Company of Major Taylor. They push into Benouville, and they push back A Company up this road, and 2 of their aid posts are exposed, and this is where some controversy occurs. The 2 aid posts, there's they're from the 225th Parachute Field Ambulance. 2 aid posts, number 32 and number 34. They somewhere in this area here, then they push up. One of them is designed. One of the aid stations is for serious casualties, and that's the number 34. The Panzergrenadiers of Braatz's 2nd Battalion, 8th Company, don't find them because they're moved upstairs away. They continue, and they come across this aid station number 32, and this is manned by the Padre, George Parry, known as Pissy Parry. This is where it's believed that the injured men in this ambulance aid post are bayoneted, or begin to be bayoneted by the Germans, and Parry steps in to try to intervene and is killed. So and that was an account from it's a book called Parry, the Parachuting Padre. So we now move on to so yeah, there's 2 reports at this time. One is from Richard Todd, He last time we spoke about him, he was here in this area. He describes this time as a classic airborne situation, where there was a very confused front line, and the battalion had evolved into 4 pockets of resistance. And presumably what he's talking about is this area here, this area here, at least being 2 of them. Right, so I think we shall call this the end of this part. At the end of part 10. And when we come back in part 11, we'll discuss the time from around about 5 o'clock as the landings on Sword Beach begin. So we'll see you in part 11.